Hello YouTube. Yes, that's right. It is finally time for me to look at and review the Minolta Maxxum 7 film SLR. And new camera, new setup, new part of the state. It's time to get this channel back on the road and start cranking out more regular videos. So why not start with the camera I promised oh so long ago. Now, to really understand the Minolta Maxxum 7, you need to know the history of the Minolta Maxxum series of SLRs. And they all started, first of all, with the Minolta Maxxum 7000, which came out in 1985 and was the first successful autofocus SLR system. And now you can see from the design of this camera, it's quite blocky. It has what I would like to describe as VCR type controls, where you have to hold one button and push some buttons over here to make it work. There is an LCD on it right here. A lot of it was kind of new. They went to these weird buttons. Aperture and shutter speed were done with these arrows here, and the zero buttons here. It was quite strange, and of course it sold well just because people were really clamoring to finally have a autofocus SLR camera that actually worked well. But in terms of user interface, it was ridiculously complicated and involved a lot of times taking your eye off of the viewfinder to look at the screen and see what you were doing with these different mode programs. Fast forward to the late 90s, and Minolta came out with this is the 650 SI, and it seems to be the designers at the company decided to make a concerted effort to, despite including all these advanced features, have one button for every control. As you can see here on the top, we have our traditional PASM, program aperture priority manual and shutter priority mode dial. We have all the different drive modes, such as single, multi-exposure, and continuous shooting and high-speed shooting and self-timer on this separate switch. You have exposure compensation surrounded by flash compensation, because this camera does have a built-in flash right there. Other things like that, choosing your autofocus area, choosing your light meter mode, choosing your flash mode, everything was on a switch. And every switch felt and acted differently. This is something that they do in aircraft cockpits in order to make it so that the pilots know what switch does what just by feel, because they all feel different and they all actuate slightly differently. And applied to the cameras, this proved to be a quite successful no-nonsense camera. So in the early 2000s, Minolta's very last line of professional 35mm cameras included this ultimate version of this idea, this Maxxum 7. As you can see, there are a lot of similarities between the 650 SI and the Maxxum 7, such as these location of the metering / exposure lock button, the location of the autofocus mode switch, and the locations of some other switches, although the functions of these switches have actually changed. Power buttons in the same place. They both have the exposure compensation in the same place over here. Other than that, though, there are a lot of differences. Not least of which is this giant LCD screen, which was the hallmark of the Maxxum 7. You did not see an LCD screen like this again until they started going to digital SLRs. And then, of course, they put a color screen here. But nonetheless, it was quite an interesting feature. And it has a lot of important uses on this camera. So I'll go through all of that next, including the operation of all the dials. Okay, so I've taken the lens off to make it a little easier to carry. It's actually quite heavy with this lens on it, and I can't really get it close enough to the camera with the lens on. But anyways, the most obvious feature of this camera is the giant screen, something that you really wouldn't expect on a film camera. It is a black and white screen. Here, let me just turn it on with the on button here. There you go. It shows you basically what you'd expect to see on the screen of a DSLR if you weren't in live view mode. So it gives you your mode, it gives you the shutter speed and aperture it wants to use, and battery information and exposure information. And if you turn on any other settings, they show up in the viewfinder: exposure, locking, different autofocus modes, as you can see here. So this screen is quite a revolutionary thing, because when Minolta went to make their first professional DSLR, it literally looks exactly the same as this camera, except they replaced this with a color screen, of course. So we're going to walk you through all the features of this, but we're going to start in kind of a strange place first. So because I have film loaded in here, there is a little film reminder window right there. But obviously I need to take that out. But what's so great about this camera that it makes it really useful for shooting 35mm film, unlike any other camera, is that you can eject the rolls midway and then return. So for example, right now, if I want to rewind this film, I simply have to push the film rewind button right there. There it goes, it's rewinding. By the way, I have it on slow rewind. There's a fast and a slow. I have it on slow to reduce noise. Otherwise, it would have taken a lot quicker. Anyways, now that I open it, you can see this camera very nicely leaves the leader out for you. So you can swap in rolls of film, and as long as you remember what frame you're on, you can put it in. And there is a setting on here that lets you advance to a specific frame. So it's keeping track of this film back and forward. So it's very handy for shooting and having to change rolls for different situations without wasting the entire rest of your roll, because you can go back to it later. Right, now that I can play with the camera without without shooting any blank rolls of film or anything, we'll get started on the operation. All right, we're gonna start with the front on this. I'm gonna go ahead and put a lens on, just because some of the stuff on the LCD screen doesn't show up unless you have a lens on to give you aperture information. This is just the standard nifty 50mm 1.7 Minolta, classic Minolta lens. Just as a side note, first of all, they changed the styles of their lenses over the 1985 to 2005-ish period that they made Maxxum autofocus lenses. This is the original style with these thin ridges. I hope you can see there. It kind of it's funny, it kind of matches the appearance of the old camera. But anyways, the newer lenses look like this. Obviously not in size, but you can see that the rubber grip has these bigger, wider dimples. And they made some in, silver to match, because they made some of the camera bodies silver. Not really that interesting, but just know that all of these will work. It doesn't really matter. And also, their 1.7 has this bizarre and cute little mini lens hood. Don't know how useful it is. Usually forget to pull it out, because it's recessed down in there, and you can't pull it out unless you manual focus it out first, like that. There you go. Kind of weird. Right. Off topic aside, let's put the lens on. It's a traditional bayonet type lens mount. There's a big red dot on the lens. There's a big red dot on the body. You line those up, and you turn clockwise. And if your camera's already turned on, it'll engage the lens stuff. Easy peasy. Actually, it's going to start autofocusing crap right now. So I'm going to turn the camera off for a second. Right, so start at the top, shutter button. Shutter button is plastic, unfortunately, so I'm wondering that's probably going to wear out at some point. What is nice though is it's double. There's two levels of actuation. You can half press, of course, to autofocus, but not take a picture. And then you push it down all the way to take the picture. What is kind of nice is there is a second LCD screen up here, a mini LCD screen. When the camera is turned off and there's film inside the camera, this mini LCD screen will show you how many frames you have left. During the operation of the camera, all it shows is your aperture and shutter speed. It doesn't have any other function. So if you have the camera on a tripod, you can look down and see it. Kind of a nice touch because it gives you that information on the back screen, on that little screen, and of course in the little screen in the viewfinder. So it's kind of nice. Here's your standard PASM mode dial. What's nice about this one is it's locked, so it doesn't turn unless you hold down the middle and spin it. There's also 3 custom positions, so you can set up all the switches on the camera, and then on here save it to one of these 3, so that if there's a specific shooting mode you prefer that requires the setting up of all of these switches, it'll save it to this even if those switches aren't physically in that position when you flip to it. There's also the super easy program mode, the green P, where it's good if you're handing the camera off to whatever, a waiter or a waitress or something to take your photo. You don't want them to mess with anything. You just want it to quickly default to the automatic settings. That's what the green P setting is for. Underneath the mode dial is the actuation type dial, which is moved by this little tab that you slide with your finger in the front. So again, it all makes sense. If you're holding the camera, you're not going to be able to want to reach your finger over here, so it's right here for you to actuate however you want. We have quite a few different modes on here. I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera on so you can see what the screen does when I do these things. So right now we have bracketing. S is for single bracketing, so every time you push the shutter button, it's gonna take a photo and you can see it's bracketing your exposures. There's continuous bracket, of course, which means it shoots all of them when you push the shutter button down once. Here we go. Great. The normal shooting mode, where you just click to shoot. We have high-speed shooting mode, which is pretty awesome because on this camera, the high-speed shooting is up to about 4 to 5 frames per second. Here we go. Quite fast for a SLR, though certainly not the fastest. It's quite good. And you can change, as you can see it says high. You can push the adjust button, and you can use the mode dial to change that between low and high. Low is like 2 frames a second, and then your high is your really high speed. You can see there's actually some sort of menu paradigm in here where it describes out what your settings are doing, and that's really the power of the having an LCD on. Even though it's a film camera, having an LCD is really useful because there's less learning involved because it tells you right there what you need to do. And then you have a self timer, and like most cameras, there's 2 options. There's the 2-second self timer and the 10-second. And they know the only reason you're going to use the 2-second is to do a mirror lockup to reduce vibration before you take a long exposure. So it just says it there, which is pretty useful. Again, kind of teaching you how to use the camera through the menus. And then finally we have multi-exposure, which increments every time you take an exposure. So you know how many you have on one frame. This will come into play later with some really cool frame advance features I'll talk about. So then moving down from the mode dials, this is the metering mode dial. You can press and hold this AEL button to lock your exposure. This shutter button, it'll lock your autofocus, but it'll not lock your exposure. So if you want to both lock your autofocus as you focus on something and then move, and also lock your exposure, you're gonna have to press that and hold down the exposure lock button and then reposition and then take your photos. You can change in the settings so that the exposure lock stays on. It's kind of a click on, click off instead of a hold. I don't have that set up, but that's not the way I like it. Oh, one other thing, when you move the dial off of the multi-exposure, it automatically goes to the next frame. Of course, it won't go to any next frame right now because there's no film in here. And surrounding the exposure dial, exposure lock, is the metering mode dial, and you have a wide angle averaging mode, you have an intelligent mode in the middle, and you have a spot mode to that side. And the spot mode just the middle. The intelligent mode, basically what that means is it meters wherever the autofocus is set, because there are multiple autofocus points. It'll choose the autofocus point that it's used to focus as the point it uses to meter. So that's what intelligent metering means. Down here you have what looks pretty much like a menu dial you would see on a modern camera. Unfortunately, on this camera, they hadn't thought of that yet. So this dial's only purpose is to choose your autofocus. So there are 9 autofocus points. There are 8 linear type around the outside and 1 cross type in the middle, as shown by this little grid diagram here. And all of these buttons along the edge of this dial, all they do is let you pick your point. The benefit of that is it's really easy to pick your point quite fast, because you can just like slide this all around and pick your point fast. And the middle button picks the middle point. That's actually all this dial does, so you can see the inspiration for digital cameras. And around the autofocus dial is another slidey type button, and this one lets you choose what this button does. There's this which lets you pick your point. There's this one which locks what point it's being used. And there's this one where it's full auto and this doesn't do anything and it just picks the point it likes the best. Coming up next, on this side of the camera, as I said before, we have exposure compensation. And again, as I turn the exposure compensation dial, it's telling you right there what it's doing. You can see it's kind of weird. It's two-sided. It has 0 to plus and minus 3 stops over here and 0 to plus or minus 2 stops over here. So you can choose which one you want. Again, it's a locked button, but you can rotate it around. So you can choose to use the button as a -2 to +2 stop in third stop increments mode, or a -3 to +3 stop in half stop increments mode. So that's completely up to you which one you want to use. And it obviously still indicates properly on here. So I'm in the third stop mode, so it's going by thirds of a stop instead of half of a stop. And underneath this dial, kind of in symmetry to this dial over here, is flash compensation. And you can see as I'm turning the dial, it's not telling me anything about the flash exposure compensation. Why is that? Well, because I haven't raised the flash. All you do is you flip up the flash like that, and it tells you the flash is enabled, and the flash compensation appears. So you can have both exposure and flash compensation simultaneously. And that screen goes away if you close it, because obviously it won't do anything for you. Power button, of course. Now we're actually going to talk about the front of the camera. So on the front, this is the lens release. This is the depth of field preview. And this is the only button on the camera I really don't like, because when you're gripping it, it only makes sense to hit that button with your pinky finger, and it's actually quite a hard button to push. So that's a bit of a pain. Other than that, I like the button placement on this camera. Here is your autofocus mode. We have a single, automatic, and continuous autofocus, which is self-explanatory. That's what you get on an autofocus camera today. And then manual focus. And you can actually hear in there. Let me put it up to my microphone. You hear that little ring as the little pin pushes in and pulls out of the lens, because these lenses are such that the autofocus motor is in the body of the camera, and that made the lenses cheaper. Very late in the life, and when Sony bought the Minolta, they switched to having the motor in the lenses. And the good news is, this is one of the few old Minolta film cameras that can use all the lenses. It can use every alpha lens, including every Sony alpha lens made until today. Of course, except for the ones designed for the crop censored cameras. But all the full frame lenses, even the ones that use autofocus lens in the body, will work properly with this camera, which is a very nice feature to have if you have a big alpha lens collection. And in addition to the AF MF switch here, there's a quick AF MF switch on this side of the camera right here, this button here. And all this does is engage and disengage the motor, so you can turn the focus ring on the lens yourself. And I think this is an excellent feature to have it this easy to access. They knew what they were doing. They knew that even though photographers really bought these cameras because they had autofocus, a lot of the old pros would probably switch to manual pretty rapidly just to focus on their own. And I agree with that. I use the manual focus a lot. I kind of use this as a focus hold too, just by disengaging the autofocus for a minute to recompose and take a picture, re-engage the autofocus before the next shot. That's just kind of how I use this button. Put this back on its default setting. My official strap is getting tangled up here. Oh, I guess I'll talk about the strap for a second. It's very well thought out. The hot shoe has this cap protecting it. And of course, the first thing you do when you get this camera is you lose that cap. Well, Minolta was thoughtful, and on the lens, on the strap, there's a little holder. There you go. So now you'll never lose your flash hot shoe cap because it's locked tightly onto your lanyard, which is really cool. It just shows that, you know, they were really thoughtful with this camera, thinking about what a professional photographer would do with it. Now we're going to talk about some other stuff with the display. This is the normal mode of the display. If you push this DISP display button, it changes modes. There's a big mode with bigger numbers and things if you have trouble seeing it. You have this mode, which includes a strip kind of indication of your exposure compensation. And there's this mode, which is basically an Excel chart, which shows you all of your previous exposures listed. And if I had a roll of film loaded, it would tell you what frame number down this column. So that's a pretty nifty feature. Next, we're going to talk about some of the more advanced features of this camera. The first is what's a Minolta called the Grip Start Eye Start. As you can see on the front of the camera, there are these metal contacts on the handle. When your hand touches those metal contacts, the metering system activates. So it's continuously metering the camera to the settings that the lens sees once you hold that. The next feature is called Eye Start, which is also turned on and off with this switch down here. Eye Start is a pair of photoreceptors under the viewfinder that activates continuous autofocus the moment you put your eye to the viewfinder. I can of course simulate that by putting my hand here. And the lens is continuously autofocusing right now. You can see it moving in and out. And otherwise, the only way for you to get it to autofocus is to half press on the shutter button. So this is a neat two-step system to make sure the camera is always ready to take a picture as soon as you pick it up and use it. There's also a light, very similar to a digital watch backlight, kind of a LumaGlow electroluminescent backlight. There you go. It stays on a few seconds, or you can push it again to close it. And actually there's one more switch on here that I completely forgot about, and that's on the side. And this is the flash mode switch, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And finally, there's so many features on this camera, by the way, I will forget something. So this is going to be quite a scattershot commentary. The screen auto rotates, which is something you wouldn't expect on something that predates digital, but there you go. The screen rotating for portrait and for landscape. It only rotates once you half press the shutter button. Come on, rotate, there you go. So quite, again, a nifty set of features for this camera. There's also a diopter here if you have glasses that you can spin this little diopter knob right there. That's it generally for the buttons, and now let's talk about the operation of the camera. Okay, some of the next features are easier to show if we have film in the camera. So let's go ahead and put some film in the camera. The film door open is right here. Open her up. This of course is a fancy autofocus camera. There's no rewind knob for you to pull up. To insert the film, you simply stick it in at an angle like this, and it drops right in. Slide it across. Quick loading, of course, as well. So you just carefully leave the tab sitting by this red mark, and then you close her up. Automatically winds up. Now you can see there's information shown here. Area 2 and DN0177. That 0177 is the number of rolls of film that have gone through the camera. So this is the 77th roll of film through the camera. In the area 2 is a memory. So let's talk about opening this big box, or this big door right here. As you can see, there are more switches, hooray. If you go to data, we see the area 2 again. And using the arrow keys here, we can see all the different areas. This is a history of every roll of film that's been in the camera. Well, not every roll. You get 9. It can only save 9. So you can go through and review your settings for every single exposure you've done with the camera, which is of course very handy if you want to go back and review what settings you used once you've developed your film. That's the data. ISO button lets you change your ISO. Straightforward. Date lets you set up the date if you wanted to print the date on your film, which of course I don't because it looks stupid. And then adjust is an all-purpose adjust, which lets you do various things. But the most important thing it lets you do is what's called selective frame transport. All you gotta do is hold it down for a few seconds and then you get the selective frame transport screen. Sorry about that, I clicked the wrong thing. So you can select the frame number by the dial. So as you can see, we can slide through this roll of film. Now, this roll of film actually used to be in this camera, and I was on exposure 6. So I can immediately go to 7, and then hit adjust again. And ta-da, we're on that frame. So, as long as you keep track, you can swap rolls of film in and out of this camera as you please, which is quite cool. And as this is an added bonus, I'm gonna go ahead and waste a shot here, all right? Okay, I took a shot and this went to 28. Now if I go back to the selective frame transport by holding down adjust, and I scroll back to 29, it's black. It lets you know that that frame has already been exposed onto. And it assumes all these previous frames were exposed onto too. Otherwise, why would you put in a roll in advance to somewhere in the middle? So you can go back. So say I wanted to double expose on frame 29. I just go to 29, push adjust. Bam, we're back on 29. Now I can take a double exposure. Quite an amazing thing to do. And then when you're done, of course, doing your double or multi exposures, you can go back to where you left off. Because 28 is the first frame that doesn't have this black border around it. There you go, back to 28. Amazing, amazing idea to have in a camera. Finally, there's 2 other things here. There's enter, which lets you store memory about this roll of film into a different memory slot, which I am not going to do. And then custom, which lets you change all the custom settings, as they used to be called in advanced cameras. These usually, of course, involved memorizing of a set of button combinations to set some often infrequently used settings. But on this camera, it's a menu, so you can use either the mode dials or the selector switches here to scroll through all the custom settings. And of course, it has words because it has a screen, which is pretty great, even though, again, I don't really need to use this very much. All kinds of things, how intense the date imprint is, a number of languages. It has all the different languages on here. Oh, probably one of the first cameras to actually let you have to select a language. And again, it tells you useful information. Like here, I can choose when you push the rewind button, if it leaves the leader out or if it sucks the leader into the roll. And if you put it on 2 for leader left out, it lets you know that you can use your selective frame transport, because of course your leader's still out, so you're not screwed when you rewind a roll halfway through. All kinds of interesting stuff like that. And by pushing the display button, you can change the way you set it. In the old school way, where it's a number and a setting, or the way that actually gives you information. That's about it for these buttons down here. There's a few things which it explicitly tells you do by pushing 2 buttons. In this case, you have to hold down adjust and custom to turn the sounds on and off. And you have to hold down data and adjust to clear all data. Kind of like a secure wipe if you want to give the camera to someone else and you don't want your frame data on there. Though I guess that doesn't matter, but they put it there anyway. And that's about it for settings and functions on the camera, except for one very interesting, very bizarre feature. And this is a setting in the custom menu. If you go to custom 3 on the mode dial, you get into this STF mode, and this is a very bizarre mode. This is something that they made a lens for, and I'll link it in the description. It's the STF lens, which is designed to have very good out of focus areas. Well, the crazy people at Minolta thought, hey, we could emulate what this STF lens does by doing what's basically a multi-exposure bracket with different focuses. So as you can see, there's all kinds of crazy stuff. Instead of F numbers, it's T numbers, which is a light transmission number rather than a light f-stop number. All kinds of complicated stuff. Most important thing for you to know is that if you want the ultimate depth of field, blurry background in your photo, you can buy this super expensive lens, or you can get this camera, which is the only camera that does this ever, by the way, to simulate what the STF selective transitional focus lens can do by basically doing a multi-exposure where it changes the aperture and it changes the focus. So it kind of really pushes the background way out of focus. Of course, it only works when you're on a tripod because it does a multi-exposure. In fact, I'll just waste a frame right now to show you how crazy this sounds. Ready, set, and go. There you go. It takes like 6 frames on one piece of the film, and you get some good bokeh, if you like to call it that. I don't. But yeah, it's kind of a bizarre add-in feature that is something you can only claim to have on this camera. All right, well, thanks for making it this far into this marathon of a video about the Maxxum 7. Now let's talk about a few accessories. I already talked about the cool holding camera strap, this actually serves a second purpose in that this shape is also used to block the eyepiece if you have it on a tripod and you don't want light leaking in here to affect your exposure. There's a few other cool accessories I've got to talk about. We will talk about the flash, and first rather, we'll talk about the grip. So this camera is quite nice and small for what it is, but my hands are kind of big and my pinky finger kind of sticks below the bottom when I hold it normally. But they have a vertical grip, which makes it, of course, twice as heavy and also much, much cooler. So to install the vertical grip, there's a cover here, which you must slide open. Also, by the way, the camera takes two 123 lithium batteries, so that this can insert. And then there's a knob on the back that you tighten. And that's it. And it makes the camera way taller. It extends this grip, which is what I like. And it duplicates most of the controls you'd want to use. It duplicates the grip start metal contacts, which is nice. It has another lanyard little slot in case you want the lanyard to hold the camera in portrait orientation. And also it has the two control knobs, dials, repeat of the shutter button, literally the same shutter button. And then a repeat of some of these switches up here, down here, your AF, MF, and your exposure lock switch. This switch down here lets you choose whether to use the battery in the grip or the battery in the camera. The battery in the grip is 4 AA's, though it has a really cool little section in here that you can't see. You can either choose to use 4 AA's, or you can put 2 more 123 batteries in here. They sit the other direction. Kind of weird. Don't know why I'd want to do that. The main reason I got the grip is so I don't have to spend money on the expensive 123 lithium batteries. But hey, I'm sure there was a reason. Maybe because the professionals use the lithium ones better and they're better in cold conditions. Anyways, that goes in there. And it also duplicates the power button over here. You can lock the buttons on here, or you can use the buttons. It's quite handy to have the vertical grip. I'm going to go ahead and leave that on there for the rest of the review. Last thing I gotta talk about is the flash. This is the second highest end flash. This is the 5400 HS. You can get these for quite cheap on eBay and KEH in those places for what they are. And that's because this is the most advanced flash that they made that is no longer compatible. Meaning that if you get as soon as they went to digital, the Sony digital alpha cameras, even though they have the same proprietary hot shoe, this flash is not compatible. You need to get the one higher, the 5600, and higher end flashes. All the flashes are backwards compatible. It's just this one is not forward compatible beyond the film Minolta cameras, which I don't mind. It made it cheap for really what it is. It's kind of an amazing flash. It has all the stuff you want, like high-speed shooting, manual and automatic modes. Really nice strobing mode too for some stop motion action, really fun. And of course, Minolta's wireless flash system, which I'll talk about right now. To engage the wireless flash system, you have to turn on the camera, and then you have to go to the flash switch on this side of the camera. You can see there's some settings. There's red eye reduction mode, there's normal, there's rear curtain mode, which lets you do a long exposure and then flash at the end of the exposure so you can get light trails and then a solid picture at the end. And WL, which stands for wireless. So what you do is you insert the flash onto the hot shoe, like so, turn the flash on. And then all you do is you slide this selector over to WL for wireless. And then, oh, I have it on program mode, sorry. So you can't have it on the green program mode because that's the easy mode. It won't give you the settings. If you go to wireless, what you should get is you get this menu immediately, and you can choose to have a ratio where the off-camera flash and the on-camera flash go to a 2-to-1 ratio, or you can have a 50-50 ratio. So you simply select the 2-to-1, and then you can detach the flash. And as the flash is detached, the little assist light on here flashes to let you know it is in wireless mode. And of course it says wireless on it now, and it says what channel it's on. And then to actually engage wireless, you need to raise the on-camera flash. Alternatively, you can put a second flash on here. So the wireless on these cameras works entirely by a code set through the strobing of this. And you can test that by clicking the exposure button. So if I click the exposure button, the exposure lock button, the onboard flash will flash, and then this will flash in response. There you go. So camera, flash, camera, flash. It's a good way to check that they're set up. Of course, the flash looks kind of weird because of the frame rate of this camera, but you get the idea. Really neat. This camera also has a off-the-film metering system that has 4 separate areas, and that lets this off-camera flash system work really great pretty much in any situation. The one thing I hate about a film camera is having to manage the flash, and this is pretty much as good as it gets to digital camera metering and flash system while still shooting your film. So it's a really good system. And again, if you don't need the forwards compatibility with your flashes, these super awesome 5400 HS flashes are only 50 to 70 bucks used, and they're really amazing flashes that you can do a bounce flash. They have the auto zoom, they have the screen on them, really nice. Of course, the only problem is once you combine the flash with the battery grip, this camera weighs a ton. Like, it starts to become a pain to carry around. But of course, that's up to your preference if you want to go all out with this setup and bling up your camera with all of these things. There's actually one more thing I wanted to talk to you about that I completely forgot, and that is that the metering system in this camera is a honeycomb metering system with quite a few, I think at least 10 metering points. And at any time you can see what those metering points are thinking by simply holding down the exposure lock button and then pushing the display button. You get this matrix view, which shows you the status of every cell in the matrix. I'm going to go ahead, take a photo of there's a bright window out here. I'm going to engage that again. And as you can see, the matrix shows you that that bright window is 1.7 or more stops higher, and then there was something dark over here. I think the side of my wall over here, the shadow. So you can get a very good visualization of just how bright everything is in your frame. And the most amazing thing, of course, is that if you turn the exposure compensation dial, let's get that again. If you turn the exposure compensation dial, it's reflected on the screen. So now it's really showing you that everything is in and out of the ideal exposure. And this is one reason why I'd go in the custom settings and change your settings so that you don't have to hold down the exposure lock button, so you don't have the situation I have right here. But there you go. As I change the compensation dial, it changes and shows you exactly both over and under and near perfect exposure, which of course is fantastic if you want to do zone system or something complicated like that with this camera. But for me, it's just good to check and make sure that none of them are above the latitude of the film you're using. So again, really nifty features, really taking advantage of having the screen, even though it's a film camera. Also, of course, in the viewfinder, it gives you all this information again in a bright green screen under the image, and the autofocus points light up with LEDs, kind of like how you'd expect on a modern camera. Oh, that's about it. I'm sure I forgot something, but you can see it's quite a powerful camera package, especially since nowadays I've seen these Maxxum 7 bodies going for less than $100 on eBay. But once you factor in all the different lenses you can use and just the thoughtfulness in this camera for providing you this button system rather than a menu system, it's a pretty compelling package. I would really especially recommend this camera to digital shooters who want to go to film but are scared about a fully manual camera. This does everything you'd expect your digital camera to do, except of course that it shoots film instead of digital. So in that sense, I heavily recommend this camera. I also would say that for film camera shooters who like manual film cameras, there's really not much here to excite you, except again for me, I really wanted the automatic flash metering. I didn't want the fuss of doing flash metering myself. And then that matrix display really piqued my interest. But yeah, I still really love this camera. I do take it out hiking and things. I have shot some weddings with it as well. And it's been extremely satisfactory in every regard. And you should watch out on eBay, because I'll be looking probably to buy a second one just as a backup, because, you know, it's very electronic. It's probably not going to last another 50 to 100 years like our mechanical film cameras, like an Olympus OM1 or anything like that. So I really want another one in case this one ever dies, because I just love using it so much. And, you know, it's a compelling package in all. So thank you very much for surviving through this probably hour-long review now. This is crazy. If you have any questions about the camera, I can of course make another video about it, or just answer you in the comments. So feel free to let me know about that. And expect more videos in the future on a more regular schedule than once every 2 years. So again, thank you for surviving through this video. Have fun shooting. Enjoy. Thank you very much.